Vermont, the Green Mountain State, where the air is crisp, the maple syrup is pure, and every sunset feels like a painting.
Come for our charming small towns, stay for our world-class skiing, or relax with a warm cup of cider in one of our many cozy cafes. And most importantly,
Don't hike into Glastenbury Mountain.
right, not a great spot for beginners.
No, not a great spot for anyone. The forest will unmake you. The trees will whisper your name.
As you enjoy scenic drives, visit our artisanal cheese shops.
Stay away from the long trail north of Route 9. Stay away from the marshlands. Stay away from the yawning stone.
Craig, stop it. And be sure to try our award-winning maple candy.
It's always watching. The mountain eats names. I have seen the hollow where time stops.
That's right. Delicacies so sumptuous, it feels like time has stopped with every bite. And if you're into craft beer, Vermont's got you.
The trees have teeth. The mountain is hollow. It's its hollow maw.
Craig, we talked about this.
It's still in me. I can feel it moving.
Vermont, so much to love.
Oh, God!
Christ almighty, what are you?
The Vermont Tourism Board reminds all visitors that the Glastenbury Anomaly Containment Authority maintains sole jurisdiction over all entities of non-terrestrial or extra-dimensional origin. Guests are encouraged to carry a compass, a crucifix, and at least 3 days of potable water. Should you become disoriented, please remain calm, refrain from screaming, and fill out a lost person self-identification form, available at all ranger stations and most post offices. Prolonged eye contact with the mountains is not advised. Whistling after dark is strongly discouraged. Do not respond to voices calling your name from the tree line.
We have known the darkness since before the stars. We are Legion.
Back to hell with you, creature!
For those traveling with pets, be advised that cats are not recognized under the current extra-dimensional liability statutes. Dogs, however, may qualify for hazard pay under Section 14, subsection C of the Recreational Safety Code. If you encounter an anomaly, please report it to your nearest park ranger. Unless the ranger is already whispering in reverse Latin, in which case we suggest you politely excuse yourself and walk briskly in the opposite direction. All disappearances are considered final, no refunds. Side effects of visiting may include time slippage, loss of sanity, and spontaneous relocation to non-Euclidean spaces. Thank you for choosing Vermont.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with you.
Vermont. So much to love, just not here. Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
And I'm Gage Hurley.
Oh, and you have arrived in the powdery slopes of the Creep Street podcast. That's right. We're headed back up to the northeast of the United States, folks. Put on that flannel shirt, grab your lumberjack and axe, grab some maple syrup, folks, because we are headed to Vermont to talk about a very peculiar portion of Vermont. Now, we've all heard of the Bermuda Triangle, right? And believe me, that will be covered soon on this show. But no, this one is decidedly less tropical. All right, a little more Fraser fir than palm tree, let's say. Folks, this week's episode is The Curse of the Bennington Triangle. That's right, back to the good old Northeast, folks, where Vermont's got a mountain meaner than an old junkyard dog. Glastenbury Mountain. Not as famous, of course, as New Hampshire's Mount Washington, sure, but it's got a resume padded with far stranger and darker credentials. It sits hunched in the Green Mountains near Bennington, a patch of land so inhospitable and twisted it feels like God intended it to be that way. To be remote, inaccessible, all lined with jagged outcroppings and blackwater marshes, stagnant pools. Since before the first colonial boots ever crunched the underbrush, this area of Vermont has had a rather bleak reputation. One that includes strange lights in the sky, flickering through the tree line, sounds you can't quite place, scents that you can't identify, ghosts said to drift through the pines like smoke, and things with shapes you almost recognize before they're gone, ones that leave a scar on your memory that you'll carry to the grave. Now, long before anyone was carving pumpkins or selling maple syrup, the Native Americans already had Glastonbury's number, and they gave it a wide berth, only going around there when necessary. It's said that the land was cursed, and perhaps it always was. No villagers, no hunting camps, just a graveyard. A place to bury the dead and then quickly get the hell out of there before something decides to bury you too. Centuries later, a handful of colonial families got the bright idea to set up shop in what would become the now vanished town of Glastenbury. And by my use of the phrase now vanished, you can tell that it didn't go well. The land seemed to have a personal vendetta against all who tread upon it. Disease seemed to hit like clockwork. Mothers would die in childbirth, and madness, and we're talking good old-fashioned stare at the wall until you drool type of madness, well, it made itself a permanent resident of the area. It's a place that chewed people up and spat them out as soon as their colonial ships touched land. And it was on these sinister slopes, thick with shadow and bad auras, that a coach full of travelers once had the misfortune of meeting the so-called Bennington Monster. Nobody could say exactly what it was, only that this thing was big, fast, and apparently in the mood for a little roadside chaos, everything you'd expect out of a monster. Well, not long after, in 1892, a man named Henry McDowell went completely haywire and murdered a man named Jim Crowley. And the court stamped him as legally insane, shipped him off to the Watersbury Asylum to spend out the rest of his days. Oh, but his days there would not be many, at least in the asylum, because McDowell busted out and disappeared. Some folks say he simply slipped back into the wilds of Glastenbury, and he's been there ever since. Today, those mountains still brood under the same low clouds. People still swap dark tales over coffee and whiskey, debating whether monsters really are at work in those hills, or whether the so-called curse still has genuine teeth. One thing is for sure, though, and it's beyond debate, that Glastenbury Mountain, the area, was the stage for one of Vermont's most unnerving mysteries. And this one didn't happen in some dusty, far-off century. It was actually recent enough to make the front page of papers all over New England. Starting in as late as 1945, people began disappearing around Glastenbury Mountain. Not one or two high-profile stories, but something closer to 10. Men, women simply gone. No ransom notes or footprints left behind in the snow, nor were there even bodies or blood trails to follow. They were just gone. Thousands of hours of searching would turn up nothing, not even a shred of clothing or a dropped cigarette butt. And to this day, the mystery sits right there. Let's start with Old Man Rivers. The first card on the table was dealt to a man named Mitty Rivers. On November 12th, 1945, Rivers was 74 years old, local born, local bred, and about as close as you can get to a human compass. He had spent a lifetime guiding hunters and fishermen through the folds and shadows of the surrounding mountains. And that day, the weather was unseasonably kind. Air was mild. The skies were calm overhead. As Rivers led 4 hunters up the slopes the way you or I might stroll to the corner store. But on the way back, he slipped a little ahead of the group. Not sprinting, not running, just a quiet lead out of the trail. The group he was leading would never see him again. Police and volunteers searched for hours. Hours turned into days. The optimism held. I mean, this was a man who could light a fire with wet matches and navigate blindfolded. Surely he would be fine. But soon the search stretched into a month, and the mountain gave nothing in return to those looking. Not a scrap of clothing or a boot print in the mud. Mr. Mitty Rivers had simply stepped off the face of the earth, it seemed. The second card that the mountain played came just a year later on December 1st, 1946. This victim's name was Paula Weldon. She was only 18 years old and a Bennington College sophomore from Stamford, Connecticut. It was a Sunday afternoon when she stepped out of Dewey Hall for what she told friends would be a short hike on the long trail. She caught a ride with a local man as far as Woodford Hollow, where he dropped her off near his home. Then around 4 p.m., a man named Ernest Whitman, a journalist for the Bennington Banner, he gave her directions, and then others spotted her after that. She stood 5'5" in a bright red parka, which would have stood out like a flare gun against the winter woods. This would be the last time anyone saw her. By Monday afternoon, it was clear Paula wasn't just running late. This girl had gone dang missing. The college even called the sheriff's department, and soon the search was on. 400 people, including students, professors, townfolk, all fanned out through the hills. But alas, nothing would turn up. Then Governor Mortimer Proctor brought in the FBI and even the New York and Connecticut State Police. Bloodhounds swept the trails, planes and helicopters buzzed the treetops overhead. A $5,000 reward was offered. A famous clairvoyant was even consulted to find Paula. Weeks passed, and still no trace. By December 22nd, the official search was called off. No body had been found, not even clothing, not even a scrap of fabric torn off on a branch somewhere. The only fact that anyone could cling to was this: a young 18-year-old woman in a bright red parka took a walk into the Vermont hills and never came back. Now, let's move on to our next person here, and we're going to start noticing a little pattern. The third disappearance literally hit like clockwork exactly 3 years to the day after Paula Weldon vanished. It was December 1st, 1949, when an elderly man named James E. Tedford had been up north visiting relatives. His family put him on a bus in St. Albans, bound for the soldiers' home there in Bennington. He boarded the bus, and witnesses reported they saw him on the ride. In fact, he was spotted at the stop just before Bennington. And then, nothing. Here's the thing. No one saw him get off the bus. No one saw him even leave his seat, but people do remember seeing him on the bus. But he was gone. The bus pulled in. His luggage was still on the rack, his timetable still in his pocket. But Tedford was nowhere. Even the driver had no explanation. like the man literally just blinked out of existence without even having to step off the bus. And what is it about December 1st? How weird is that? 3 years to the day. And Mitty Rivers, I mean, it wasn't exactly a year, but he vanished November 12th, 1945. Paula goes missing December 1st, 1946. And now we have James Tedford going missing on December 1st, 1949.
I noticed that too. It's like in the winter, the early winter.
Right. That late fall, early winter kind of time zone right there. And literally, and I know that we've said it a few times, but literally almost like clockwork. Exactly like clockwork in the case of Tedford and Paula. Like literally the day, 3 years later, they went missing. Like absolutely astounding. And the fact James's is just so weird to me because the fact that he was on the bus, people saw him on the bus driver driving there's only one way out the bus.
Right.
And that's by the driver's seat. Like he would have seen James get off at another stop. People had seen him even just before the Bennington stop, it says. And yet it's like he just was plucked out of existence right out of the bus itself. Well, folks. Keeping with the theme of autumn, it was not even a year later on Columbus Day, which is October. This was 1950 when an 8-year-old boy named Paul Jepson disappeared in the blink of an eye. His parents were farmers who doubled as caretakers at the town dump. They were both working that day. Paul sat in the family pickup wearing a bright red jacket that should have made him stand out once again like a flare gun on that gray October day. Much like Paula's red jacket should have made her stand out. His mother stepped away literally for just a moment to move some pigs, and when she looked back, Paul was gone. He wasn't in the truck or anywhere near it. It was between 3 or 4 in the afternoon. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run, and yet Paul was gone. They called in help immediately, especially considering this is an 8-year-old boy. Volunteers and officials combed the dump. They combed the roads, the mountain. This time, they even did a double check system. One search party scoured an area, and another went over the same ground right after, as sort of like a double checking, triple checking your work, essentially. But still, not a single trace, not even a footprint. Paul, this 8-year-old boy in the red jacket, just like those before him, was simply gone. Coast Guard planes circled overhead while local psychics even lent their gifts to the search. But neither made a dent. The bloodhounds were brought in from New Hampshire State Police, and what was strange was they actually picked up and followed Paul's trail through the crisp autumn air until it stopped cold at the junction of East and Chapel Roads, west of Glastenbury Mountain. And here's where it gets truly unsettling. Local legend says that's the same exact spot where Paula Weldon was last seen. 2 disappearances, years apart, ending at the same invisible wall, and both wearing clothing that should have been easy to spot. Now, at one point, Paul's father mentioned a strange detail, something he actually hadn't thought about much before. Before his disappearance, Paul had developed what he called a, quote, unaccountable yen to go into the mountains. No reason or explanation offered, just a pull towards those dark, silent hills, which I can understand why in the moment you wouldn't think about it. I mean, kids are like, who wouldn't, it's a mountain. Like, granted, now, if you are raised around them, they aren't as mystifying as they are for maybe, say, like, whenever I see mountains, it always still, because I come from a flat land. So when I see mountains, I'm drawn to them because it's like, wow, So it's natural. 8-year-old boy is probably filled with adventure, wants to go out and have fun. So I can understand why the dad at first wouldn't see that as anything unusual. I mean, it's a kid. He probably just wants to go play.
But actually, if he did venture to the mountain by himself, that It's not surprising that he'd be fascinated by them. It's very surprising that 8 years old, he would actually venture up to the mountain by himself.
Exactly. Right. On October 14th, 1950, the Bennington Banner laid it out plainly, saying, "The mystery of Paul's complete disappearance and not a single clue to work on makes the fourth counting Tedford, such a case of a missing person in practically the same area during the past 5 years." Whatever was happening in the woods surrounding Glastenbury Mountain, it was no longer looking like a coincidence. A pattern was starting to take shape, and it was an ugly one. Well, it was about 2 weeks later, on Saturday the 28th, just a few days before Halloween, and a woman named Frida Langer set out on a hike with her cousin Herbert Elsner. They left from their family camp on the eastern side of Glastenbury Mountain near Somerset Reservoir. And Frida wasn't some city slicker out looking for some weekend fun. No, my sources say she was a 53-year-old, tough-as-nails, short gal, and apparently was a crack shot with a rifle and no stranger to the local woods. She knew the land like the back of her own weathered hand. And at about 3:45 p.m., barely half a mile from camp, she slipped and fell into a stream. Soaked through and likely freezing, she told Herbert she'd just jog back real quick, change into some dry clothes, and be back to finish the hike. Well, what have we learned, huh? What did Scream teach us about saying, "I'll be right back"? It means you're probably not gonna be right back, Frida. And of course, Herbert, her cousin, would not see her again, nor would anyone else. Because when Frida didn't come back, Herbert decided to double back towards the camp to find her. But not only had she failed to return, no one else had seen her leave the woods at all. Given the recent string of vanishings, local officials wasted no time. They got right to work, and a search was launched, combing the forest for any trace of her. Of course, nothing was found. But on November 1st, General Merritt Edson, Vermont State Director of Public Safety, he called in a second search. This time, he gave an order straight out of a pulp detective novel. He said, "Find her, dead or alive." Helicopters circled overhead. Amphibious planes skimmed the marshland. Legions of searchers scoured the forest floor, but even Edson couldn't order his men to do the impossible. No tracks, no scraps of clothing, nothing was found. Absolutely no sign she'd ever even been out there at all. As the Bennington Banner put it in one of their articles, quote, "One of the things hard to explain is how Mrs. Langer could have become so completely lost in an hour's time before dark in her area with which she was so thoroughly familiar." And let's remember that, these are people who are familiar with the area. Now, I know, obviously, accidents happen. Doesn't matter how experienced you are, I understand that. But it doesn't sound like she was in any particular, she wasn't climbing the Himalayas or something. She wasn't, there was literally a hike in the dang woods. It wasn't like she was trying to scale a mountain or do anything like that. She was in an area where she knew very well. And even let's say something had happened, she tripped, she hit her head and she died or something. How does no one find her?
Yeah.
That's the thing. How does no one even find her?
They utilized some serious resources to find her, too. They went all out. And still nothing? Not a dead body? Nothing at all. Just no trace.
And that's the thing about all the people we've talked about so far. It's not even a mysterious death. They just don't even know where the heck they went. There's not even blood or
Right. No trace.
Right. They're not even finding footprints. Well, on November 5th, the search ramped up again. This time, they went into full formation. 3 groups of 30, lined shoulder to shoulder, would sweep through the forest like a human comb. If there was a clue out there, it would have been nearly impossible to miss. Well, good golly, they must have missed it, because they found nothing. By the weekend of November 11th, officials unleashed their biggest push yet. They called in professional sportsmen military and police units, firemen, and community volunteers. Over 300 people fanned out across the woods. And the result? Another helping of Jack Diddley squat. Not a shoe print, no fabric, not even the courtesy of a false lead was found. By Monday, Frida's family surrendered to the inevitable. After weeks of searching, the combined muscle of Vermont's civilian and military might had come away with exactly nothing to show for it, not a single solitary worthwhile clue. Some sources like to pad the mystery out a little bit with a couple of extra names, but the paper trail tells a different story. On December 3rd, 1950, just days after the search for Frida Langer had fizzled, and keep in mind it was December 1st that Paula and the boy Paul had gone missing, so once again we're working in this same area of time. Well, it was just days after the search for Frida had fizzled when Frances Christman left her home to walk to a friend's place about a half a mile away. She never arrived. The Bennington newspaper reported it, and yes, a woman really did vanish, but here's the kicker. She vanished in Hinesburg, Vermont, a solid 120 miles north of Glastenbury, which means if she was part of the Bennington Triangle, well then, this is a pretty generous triangle. Then there's teenager Martha Janetti Jones, who supposedly disappeared near Glastenbury on November 13th, 1950. The time and place seem to fit until you keep on researching. Flip to the December 20th, 1950 issue of the Bennington Banner, and there she is alive and well in Occoquan, Virginia, near a military base working as a waitress. So I'm glad that the sources didn't try to pad it out with, obviously these are tragic things, the woman going missing, but it was 120 miles away. So now, how big is this triangle? We aren't really sure. Triangle usually gets, I found that the term triangle, with the exception of maybe the Bermuda Triangle, kind of gets associated with a certain area oftentimes. So if there's a certain area where things are weird, they'll kind of call it a triangle. They'll usually, in the triangle, the points of the triangle are usually towns that kind of set up the barrier of where the disappearances is. So maybe you had someone at this town that's like the top point, or, all that stuff. So we obviously, there's no way to know if these other two people were in any way affiliated with the story of the Bennington Triangle, but needless to say, they did happen, whether they are affiliated or not. Well, and it's a good thing to remember, an example we've used in the past, we did the Curse of King Tutankhamun, how the members, after they discovered his tomb, how the members of this expedition started to die off in bizarre ways. Well, there's a certain amount of deaths that happen within a few weeks, and it's like, wow, that is weird. Now, when you're including members of the expedition that died 20 years later, it's like, okay, well, is that really affiliated?
What's the statute of limitations on things like this?
Exactly, right. And so it's kind of and it's kind of the same here, just in terms of geography. It's like, the farther out you go, it's like, was that really affiliated with the Bennington Triangle? But there are a core group of disappearances, just as in the case of King Tutankhamun's tomb, there was a core group of deaths right after it that is freaky as hell. And it's like, whoa, especially the way they died, and very weird. And same thing with this. It's like there is a group of disappearances where it's almost exactly on top of each other, same date, same area. It is weird. So like we said, even without padding from Christman and Jones, the Bennington Triangle's batting average for swallowing people whole is, well, it's swinging pretty high. Between 1945 and 1950, 5 human beings simply stepped off the map. That's one person each year on average. But maybe it wasn't just 5. According to the Burlington Free Press reporter Sally Jacobs, writing on October 25th, 1981, the Paula Weldon case wasn't only a mystery of the late 40s. She claimed that 2 years after Weldon vanished, quote, a trio of hunters from Massachusetts vanished near the ghost town of Glastenbury. Just like the others, they were never seen again. And then there's a line buried in a Bennington Banner article mentioning a 13-year-old Bennington boy named Melvin Hills who disappeared in the same cursed patch of forest around October 11th, 1942. If both of those stories hold any water, the Triangle's roster jumps up from about 5 to about 9. And that's obviously not a trend you want your hometown to be known for. It ain't like being known as having the best pecan pie, you know what I mean? You could understand why, especially, in certain... You could understand why you wouldn't want certain things. There's ones that are inescapable that you kind of have to acknowledge, but then you could understand why tourism boards and all that stuff wouldn't want that notch on their metaphorical bedpost, essentially.
Especially back then. I feel like today, more so, a town would see that as an opportunity to, that could be an incentive nowadays. Back then, in the 40s, I think they would want to avoid that reputation.
Absolutely. I think you're right. I think with especially the advent of the internet and stuff, it doesn't even mean that before the internet, there weren't people out there interested in that sort of thing. I think it's just with the advent of the internet, communities kind of find each other and you're like, oh, there is a huge population that would actually probably think that was cool. You know what I mean? So you can kind of see now why people lean into it, why certain haunted hotels, some really lean into the gimmick and some kind of like, they kind of roll their eyes at it as if like, they're above it sort of thing. So, it's kind of a similar thing. Like you can understand, especially back then, why you wouldn't want to be known as the place where children and the elderly go missing.
That's not going to bring in a lot of new residents.
Absolutely right. Well, where did these folks go? That's the riddle at the rotten core of the Bennington Triangle. Was the so-called Bennington Monster, talked about by the colonials, was that what was dragging victims off into the cold, dark swamps of Glastenbury? If so, then what is the nature of this monster? Is it flesh and blood? Is it supernatural? Did the missing stumble into some kind of invisible trap door in the fabric of reality, a sort of window area that drops you off into parts unknown? Or maybe they stepped on that cursed stone told of by Native American legends, the one that yawns wide and swallows you whole. One Bennington Banner reporter even tossed out the idea of a Yankee Shangri-La hidden up there in the peaks of the Green Mountains, a sort of misty paradise where people simply wandered in and forgot to wander out. For some, that's the most comforting theory, because the alternatives involve endings that are a lot less mysterious adventure than they are tragedy. Alien abduction, of course, is a common theory. The kind where, if you believe the reports of the hypnotized, you wake up strapped to a table under cold white lights, subjected to exams that make your annual physical look like a day at the spa. Then you're sent home with missing time, strange scars, and maybe a small piece of alien tech rattling around in your skull. Well, some folks, if you believe the rumors, they never make it back at all. Or maybe it was something far more terrestrial, far more ugly, a predator with a taste for human game. But if this predator is a flesh and blood creature, why no tracks? The pattern is pretty tight. It's a tight 5-year time frame we're talking about. Same patch of mountain with victims ranging anywhere from ages 8 to 75, men and women both. So it's not like if this was a serial killer, typically they have an MO, right? They have a type. This kind of leans itself against that. And it's always in the last quarter of the year. And then as suddenly as it begins, it stops. Now, serial killers in some ways would fit that mold, like the ones who sort of kill by seasons, or just like they kill at certain times of the year and then vanish when the weather changes and leave a trail of nothing but questions and misery behind. Maybe this potential wacko comes up north for the fall foliage each year. Well, he was hunting something that didn't make it back into the game reports. Back then, locals even gave him names, the kind of nicknames you only get when the town's fear needs a face. The Bennington Ripper, the Mad Murderer of the Long Trail. These were all names that people who believed in that theory had given to this metaphorical or possibly real, possibly not killer. But for all the speculation, there was never a body that proved murder was even a factor at all. And that's when the simple question started sounding more like accusations. If snow was on the ground during these vanishings, why didn't it help the trackers? If some poor soul wandered off and froze, why didn't the spring thaw turn them up? Instead, the mountain would keep the people it took.
And also, you would think that people would be even less likely to venture out in that kind of weather. Especially, that woman, even though she knew the woods so well, you wouldn't think these people would be venturing out there in dangerous conditions.
Right. You would think that, especially if they are as well acquainted with the area, they would know even better than someone who didn't when to go and when not to go.
And as for the lack of footprints, that might lend itself to alien abduction. Or something flying, if it was a creature. Something that maybe just snatched them.
Right. Think about the boy. The hounds had gotten his scent for a little bit. They tracked him to the corner of those two streets, and it ended dead cold. Now, I don't know much about that sort of crime forensics and stuff, but my first assumption was, well, did that mean someone pulled up in a car and nabbed him? But I don't know how that works, if the hounds can then still smell a little bit in the air, in the direction the car went. I don't know how that works. So,
and still, that was a pretty significant distance away from where they first started the trail, too. So,
absolutely. And, well, what really makes that, too, so interesting is that was also where they think Paula was last seen. So that's what really makes it interesting. It's one thing if, yes, he did get grabbed off the street, but then does that mean two people were taken right off the street in that same corner? Ooh, just had to take a quick pause there, Creep Street, just to give your poor palpitating heart a rest. If you're enjoying this episode, go ahead and follow us on Facebook, Instagram at Creep Street Podcast, Twitter at Creep Street Pod, TikTok at Creep Street Podcast. That's right. And if once a week is not enough for you, just head on over to patreon.com for all sorts of goodies. We got 3 different tiers there, something for every tier. So get your fixins. We even got a free tier where you can listen to the weekly sketches before they go live on the episode. Now, without further ado, back to today's story. Then came the one twist that still makes even the seasoned locals shiver. On May 12th, 1951, so breaking from our time frame here, 7 months after she had gone missing, Frida Langer finally turned up. Not miles away in some uncharted gulch or deep in a cave, but get this, lying out in the open, in the tall grass, by the flood dam of Somerset Reservoir. The exact same spot that had been combed over and over and over again by the most thorough search of the entire Bennington Triangle saga. It was as if the mountain decided to just give her back, but only after it was done with her. So think about that. It's like you would think that a body turning up would at least give you some answers, but instead, it only makes it weirder because it was out in the open. It's not like they found her body as if someone had tried to hide it, or she fell down into some crevice where people would have missed her. She's laying out in the open, where they had searched many times. It would be sometimes we look for our keys and then they turn up kind of almost right in front of you. You're like, oh, well, imagine literally searching for days for something and then it pops up on your tape, right in front of you. You know what I mean? You find it sitting nice and pretty on the table or something. That's weird.
It's almost like her body was returned. Because obviously, how could they have missed it? But why was it returned?
Exactly, right. What purpose did it serve for the time it was held? And why even give it, why not just The Bennington Banner called the remains gruesome, and no cause of death could be determined. As for the others, they, of course, remain phantoms in the record. with no bodies, no clothing, or DNA of any kind, just names on a list and questions without answers. Well, it's natural that when things like this happen, people start to freak out. While Massachusetts may lack the brooding peaks of Vermont, it makes up for it with its own roster of, quote, window areas. These curious patches of Earth where the rules seem to bend and people go missing. These are the kind of places where UFO sightings are just part of the weather report. And monsters seem to wander in all the time for a cameo. And people go missing. Disease and crime and full-on madness all make regular appearances on the bill. Researcher Lauren Coleman once summed it up best, likening these spots to, quote, Gaia's paranormal zones, her pimples, if you will. Blemishes that the universe can't help but pick at, again and again. And one such blemish might be the land surrounding the glossy expanse of the Quabbin Reservoir near Amherst. Nearly 80,000 wild, whispering acres cradled the water, a stretch of mid-Massachusetts wilderness with more than enough room to hide whatever strange stories yet to slip out. But of all the strange things said to haunt the Quabbin, the most believable might be its supposed population of North American mountain lion, also known as the panther, or the puma, the mountain screamer, the catamount, or whatever else you want to scream before the thing mauls you to death. Officially, Massachusetts hasn't had one of these since 1858, when the last one was killed in Amherst. But since then, more than 300 sightings have been logged, and half of them right there in the Quabbin's backyard. And yet, big cats aren't even the oddest creatures said to lurk the area. That honor probably goes to the crocodiles of Dismal Swamp near Ware. In 1922, locals reported seeing several 6 to 8 foot long reptiles gliding through the water. And in more recent years, smaller 3-foot crocs have actually been caught. Not exactly the kind of critter you'd expect to find sunbathing in New England. But some tales from the Quabbin aren't exactly easy to digest, literally or figuratively. Take the night of August 13th, 1919, between 8 to 9 p.m. The sky above the reservoir suddenly lit up with a blinding white flash, followed by an explosion. Then, like something out of a bizarre dream, a glowing object drifted down and landed just 20 feet from the front door of a man named Erastus Dewey. Enter another gentleman named Rufus Graves, an Amherst professor who examined the fallen oddity and found it to be bowl-shaped, about 8 inches across and an inch thick, with a fuzzy, cloth-like surface, the color of yellowish-pink flesh. Inside was a foul-smelling pulp that, when exposed to air, liquefied and turned blood red. Several more of these bizarre blobs would later be scattered and found across the area, because apparently one just wasn't enough to make the locals uneasy. Other UFOs in the area aren't the crash-landing, blob-dripping kind. Long before flying saucers became a household phrase in the 1940s, strange lights and objects were already a part of the local landscape. And sometimes they didn't even bother with the sky. Case in point, the winter of 1906. Petersham resident Isaac Spidey had headed to bed when he noticed an eerie glow coming from his barn on Neshawag Road. Instead of the warm flicker of lantern light or the panic-inducing orange of a fire, this was something else entirely. The glow would dim and then surge back to full brightness, repeating the cycle over and over as Spiny stood frozen in the doorway, too unsettled to step inside and too fascinated to look away. Whatever it was, it certainly wasn't a fire, but that only left far more unsettling questions. Like, what in God's name was it? Spiny forgot all about going to bed. Instead, he tore off to find his neighbor Seymour Williams, blurting out enough of the story to get the man sprinting back with him. And sure enough, the light was still there, breathing in and out like some spectral lung, until it decided to make things even stranger. When before their eyes the glow detached from whatever it had been resting on, gathered itself into a sphere, and floated right out of the barn. It didn't zip away. In fact, it kind of meandered like it had all night to haunt the countryside, drifting in the direction of one W.B. Spooner's farm. Spiny and Williams split up, trying to cut it off, but as soon as they moved in close, the light blinked out suddenly. Gone, like somebody snuffs out a flame on a candle with 2 fingers. When word spread, neighbors bolted their doors and reached for whatever passed as home defense in 1906. No one could agree, though, if it was a phantom, or a firebug, or a haunt, or horseradish. But whatever it was, it didn't come back. And I think why they include this in the source is just to say, I think it's kind of lending itself to the UFO hypothesis, but depending on how big this triangle is, they could be involved, but this is something that kind of seems like on the outskirts almost, like uninvolved, I would think, especially since it was years before when this happened.
Right, like almost 50 years, or like 40, pretty significant, long stretch of time.
Exactly. It's kind of like what we were saying earlier about how far away does something have to be until it's its own thing, or something unrelated? How weird does something have to be for it to be unrelated? Now, like obviously a bowl made of pink yellow flesh kind of seems unrelated to what we're talking about here, but it's still within the relatively the same area, depending on, like we said, we don't know how big this theoretical triangle is. So it could be related, and if it is, it's sort of a predecessor to what would happen later on. Now, a lot of weird stuff happens in the mountains up there. We did, I think it was in New Hampshire, in the White Mountains. This is in the Green Mountains, but in the White Mountains, we told the story about a man who was said to almost be a vampire. Was a man who had sought to essentially find the keys to immortality and may or may not have done it, but may have done it at the cost of having to consume lives in the process. People would go missing in this area for a century. People would go missing right in this same area. So it just goes to show you, especially in these New England states that are so tiny and packed into each other, they kind of share a similar, which is obviously my source is a book about things, strange things in New England, but it just shows you how there's a lot of similar DNA between a lot of these things, and they may or may not be related. But I wanted to close out the proceedings with a story I found on Reddit about someone's personal experience with the Bennington Triangle. And this story is called, "My Grandmother Taught Me Everything I Know About How to Survive in Appalachia. This is Her Experience in the Bennington Triangle, also known as the Zone of Death." Greetings, everyone. My name is Geraldine, and I believe my granddaughter, Ellie, recently shared with you her ordeal in the woods, the one she endured with her father. Bless her heart. She survived only because she listened, because she remembered. My son, on the other hand, always dismissed our family stories, called them woo-woo crap. That arrogance nearly cost them both their lives. Ellie told me you were curious about the old tales, the ones we don't tell lightly. So I'll share one. The story of how I almost lost my life and my sanity within the Bennington Triangle. It was the summer I turned 16. My friends and I had planned a celebratory camping trip. Just the 3 of us, myself, Pauline, and Donetta. They were familiar with the trails, yes, but not with the truths that walk beside them, not with the rules. I was certain my knowledge would protect us, but I was wrong. That morning, as we packed up, I made sure I had everything. A compass, a map, a week's worth of food, a tent, water, clothes, and my sleeping bag. But most important were the things that Pauline rolled her eyes at. a pouch of salt to encircle our camp, ash to keep away the barefooted ones who stalk the trees after sunset, a red string tied tight around my waist to confuse the triangle's pull, and iron filings to weigh down the soul in places where the veil wears thin. Donetta agreed to carry a pouch like mine, and I wrapped a red string around her waist too, but Pauline just scoffed at me when I offered her the same. The hike began peacefully, almost too peacefully. Birds chirped, wind played in the leaves, and sunlight danced along the path like it was leading us somewhere. And then, everything changed. The light dimmed, though no clouds had passed the sun. A cold mist bled across the trail ahead of us. And then silence. Total silence. Not a bird, nor the breeze, just nothing. And I knew. Rule 1. If the birds stop singing, close your eyes and count backward from 13. Do not open them until you hear a chickadee. We had stepped into a thin place, a fault line in the skin of the world. Close your eyes, I hissed, stopping cold. Now, and don't open them until I say. Donetta's eyes suddenly widened in confusion and fear, but she quickly obeyed. Pauline laughed. Seriously? Another one of your creepy old rules? I closed my eyes and began counting. 13, 12, 11. A shiver carved down my spine. Something was there, moving, heavy, slow, and wrong. The air around me shifted, as if the space itself bent to let it pass. 10, 9, 8. Footsteps. Bare, wet. Not behind me, not beside me. Next to Pauline. 7, 6. She gasped. A strangled, sharp noise, not fear, but surprise. Then a scream tore through the trees, brief, cut off, and then nothing. 3, 2, 1. The birds began singing again. I opened my eyes. Donetta was crouched, trembling, red string still tight around her waist, and she was holding on to it like a lifeline. I turned towards where Pauline had stood. She was gone. No tracks. No signs of a struggle. No sound, no trace. Only a faint impression in the mist, as if something impossibly large had passed through and taken her with it. "Where is she?" Donetta exclaimed, frantically looking around the forest. I think she was taken," I said. "Pauline!" Donetta shouted, running off the trail and into the brush. "Don't leave the trail!" I shouted after her, but it was too late. Panic flared in my chest as I ran after her, the mist thickening unnaturally around us. The world became a blur of ghost gray fog and shadowy trees. I tripped. Branches clawed at my arms, roots dragged at my ankles. Everything smelled damp and old, like soil that hadn't been turned in centuries. By the time we stopped running, the sun was bleeding out behind the trees. The trail was gone. "We're not going to find her in the dark," I said, trying to sound calm, though dread coiled tight in my stomach. "We'll camp here. At first light, we'll try to find the trail again and get help." Donetta nodded, hollow-eyed. She didn't argue. We pitched the tent in silence. I laid a thick ring of salt around our site, whispering the old words my grandmother taught me. Not prayers, but warnings. Protection, barriers. Donetta wandered off to relieve herself, and I waited, glancing at the darkening tree line, each shape seeming to breathe and shift and watch. And then came the whistle. Sharp, piercing, and not far off. "Hey, Geraldine? Where are you? I can't see." Danetta's voice rang out, panicked. "Follow my voice," I called, stepping out just outside the salt ring. I cupped my hands around my mouth and let out a sharp whistle back. And then I froze. From the trees to my left came a low, guttural growl, a sound that vibrated in my bones like distant thunder. The forest fell completely still, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Donetta stumbled into me from the dark, breathless, her face pale. "Thank God," she gasped. "Quiet," I whispered, dragging her back. "We have to get to camp now." But it was already too late. The growl grew louder, heavier, and closer. And then I saw them. 2 glowing red eyes floating above the forest floor, impossibly high off the ground. They blinked slowly, then moved towards us. Snap, snap, twigs shattering beneath something heavy, something deliberate. And that's when I remembered. Rule 2. Never whistle after dark. It summons it. If you hear a twig snap but see no animal, drop meat or bone behind you, and don't look back. We ran. Branches whipped our faces, the mist stung our skin, but we didn't stop until we reached the faint outline of the salt ring. My legs shook, lungs burning. Behind us, that low snarl rumbled again. "Help me get the fire going," I barked, my fingers clumsy and cold as I scrambled for kindling. Donetta helped, her hands shaking as badly as mine. The fire caught slowly, then flared to life. But the eyes were still there, now just beyond the salt, close enough to smell the singe of its breath. And then it stepped forward. Not a dog, not really. It looked like one. But it was too tall, too wrong. Black fur matted and glistening, jaws filled with long, uneven teeth. It moved with the patience of something that knew we had nowhere left to run. The Hound of Glastenbury. The guardian of the Bennington Triangle. The enforcer of the rules. And we had broken one. I reached into my pack with trembling hands, searching for an offering. All I had was jerky. I flung a piece beyond the salt. It snatched it up with impossible speed and yet didn't retreat. Instead, it kept circling, watching and testing. Its growls deepened like a voice trying to form words in a throat not meant to speak. We stayed awake the entire night, our backs pressed to each other. Salt circle unbroken, fire never allowed to die. But the eyes didn't leave. Not until dawn. We didn't dare pack up camp until the sun was high enough to burn through the fog. Even then our hands trembled as we smothered the fire. Every rustle in the brush made us jump. Every snapped twig set our nerves on edge. We didn't speak. We just moved, quickly and carefully, constantly glancing behind us. It took hours. My compass spun more than once, the needle twitching like it was unsure where we were. But finally, the trail reappeared, like it had been hiding and watching. We didn't celebrate, we just walked faster. We didn't call for help because we knew better. Voices don't always come from the things you expect out here. It was mid-afternoon when we heard it. A whisper, soft and deliberate, curling through the trees like smoke. "Donetta, Geraldine." We froze. It sounded exactly like her. "Pauline?" Donetta called, her voice shaking. "Pauline, is that you?" "Donetta." The voice came again, closer now from behind us. From the corner of my eye, I saw it. Tall. Impossibly tall, with limbs that bent branches and antlers that looked like rotting wood. Its face was a void, blacker than shadow, hungrier than the silence. It wasn't Pauline. It was the Watcher. Rule 3. Don't look up when the wind whispers your name from behind a tree or in the mist. He's watching. I grabbed Danetta's arm and screamed, "Run!" We bolted down the trail, breath ragged, feet slamming against the dirt. Behind us, twigs cracked in rhythm with our steps, bushes rustled with unnatural violence, and always the Watcher lingered just out of view, glimpsed only in the corners of my eye. "Donetta," the third whisper. I turned, just for a second, and Donetta was gone. No scream, no struggle, she was gone. There was only the sound of the wind and the trail before me. I didn't stop, I couldn't. I knew what came next, but luckily I knew what to do. I burned my boots and left them by a fork in the trail, a decoy. I ran until my legs gave out. I crawled, hid beneath roots, covered myself in mud to mask my scent, and it watched me the whole time. The forest rangers found me 3 days later, barefoot, bruised, eyes wild. They said I must have gotten lost, delirious from dehydration, a survivor of exposure. They launched a search for Donetta and Pauline, brought in dogs, volunteers. They never found them. Even if they did, it wouldn't be them anymore. Because the forest doesn't just take people here, it replaces them. I still live near these woods. Foolish, maybe, but this land has been in my family for generations. I know its rules. I follow them to this day. Sometimes, though, at night, I hear them.
Geraldine.
Calling me from just beyond the tree line. Pauline, Donetta. Their voices are perfect, but I never answer. Because I know it's not them, not anymore. And if I answer, it might remember that I'm still here. Well, folks, I wanted to wait until the end to tell you, but that story was actually posted in No Sleep. Now, as far as I understand, I think No Sleep is intended to be fictional, right? Kind of like creepypasta.
I think so.
I mean, I know the allure is that it kind of walks a line, but I think the intention is it's supposed to be fictional. Whereas, say, like in a Reddit forum like Paranormal Encounters, those stories are allegedly supposed to be real. I'm pretty sure that No Sleep is supposed to be fiction. I mean, notice the name Pauline. I mean, it sounds like it was not that, there's obviously more than one person named Pauline, but it seems like an homage to the actual victim. Although, I mean, who knows? But there was this interesting post, follow-up to this. It was by someone, I think they were commenting on the post, by a poster named Goblin Marketeer. They had something interesting to say. This is what they said. I actually worked on a documentary for this. It was abandoned, though, because it didn't have the angle they were looking for. I did go to various sites and shoot B-roll and interview some people. And then I had a spooky, weird thing happen on the way back to the hotel. So most of these are easy to explain. The missing hunters. When I went to shoot there, I was specifically warned several times that they are mine shafts and crevasses that you could fall into. As for Paula Weldon, when I asked about it, locals were like, dead and dumped in a hole somewhere. One of the older locals pretty much said it was her boyfriend, in the New England way of saying things without saying them. The woods are super dense in that area. Like, walk 10 feet off the path and you could lose the trail. And the hiking trail is like a single car lane wide. Also, the woods are eerie as hell in places. It looks like a place where you could just vanish and never be heard from again. At one point, I was shooting the trail, and there was a mist and fog, and all of a sudden, church bells started playing a song. I think it was Memories from Cats. The story of the missing soldier and the researcher, I'm pretty sure, never actually happened. Couldn't find any record of it at the time. Just 1 year later, and there was some question if the name even existed or not. She was pretty adamant it wasn't a thing, though, such that she didn't give me a location to shoot for that one. All in all, they gave up on the idea, found it was just a number of fairly mundane vanishings clustered very roughly together. I got paid, though, so there's that. Also, fun side note, the old Bennington College building is super creepy, and the grounds have random statues everywhere. Things like monks holding their own heads and things. Oh, and there's a ghost town in the Triangle, Shaftesbury. The town was abandoned due to bad weather, I think it was. Not much left but basement holes, though. So kind of interesting, because that quote, who knows if the comment was real or unreal. Obviously, they didn't make any claims in this comment that were too extreme or spooky or whatever, but it just kind of adds to the local folklore, I think, a little bit of how people view this mountain and, what people might think. I'm sure decades and decades later, I'm sure there's people that believe, and I'm sure there's people, you can understand why someone, especially if you're a grieving family, you might not want your loved one's disappearance associated with what you think is a silly legend. You would rather you see that as disrespectful, which I totally understand. But this is one of those cases where it's tough to say, where is it the triangle? It's like a chicken or the egg thing. What comes first? Was there a triangle? Like we said in the very beginning, that even the native populations before the colonials got there already saw this area as something to be kind of respected and kept a distance from. Or is it something that started tragically but naturally, and then a legend was built around it? Who knows? Maybe it's one and the same. Maybe things can start that way, like we say, and they become real things because of the fear and the tragedy that's poured into them. But pretty strange stuff, I would say.
Oh yeah, very strange. And yeah, there's no way we can definitively say that these disappearances are linked and they're tied to the same cause, but they, on their own, each individual one has such strange circumstances, and then the commonalities in those circumstances definitely makes it worth considering. And it's an interesting set of circumstances with these disappearances. The dogs losing the trail, the 8-year-old boy wandering off, the woman who knew the woods so well and yet disappeared, and just the fact that these people were never found, most of them, even after some really serious search attempts.
And for me, maybe the weirdest one is James Tedford, the elderly man who vanished right out of the bus as it was on its way there. So it makes you wonder if that was affiliated with whatever. Let's say there's some sort of a inexplicable, perhaps supernatural essence to this area of land. That would mean that you don't even have to necessarily go missing or to go off into the woods on a hike. This guy was sitting on a commercial bus next to other people. And from the way it sounds, like it wasn't like he was ripped out of the bus. It was they turned around and he was gone, or they looked back in the mirror and that guy that had been there wasn't there anymore. That's a weird one, because it's like the other ones weren't even out in the wild. And then Frida's body turns up in the wide open. What would be the purpose of that if this is truly like a supernatural area, or not even supernatural, but just something we don't understand? What's the purpose of giving, or what? Because why not give them all back if that's the case? Or why was it Frida who was suddenly just popped up?
The sort of just vanishing nature of these disappearances, just without a trace, makes me kind of think that it could be something alien, that it could be something technological too. You got to imagine aliens have technology that far surpasses our own, or anything we maybe can even conceive of. Who's to say they don't have some sort of teleportation type technology? And if they are, let's say, abducting people in a certain area, which, we've talked about, there could be reasons for that, such as the government says that you can take people from certain areas or what have you, or maybe that's just where they choose to operate. The guy on the bus, Who knows? Maybe they have some sort of technology where they can just teleport people to their ship.
Right. Not unlike beaming, like in Star Trek, beaming someone up and out of a place. Like, it's very fascinating, but I'll tell you what, Gage, I got a list of names I wouldn't mind hiking up Glastenbury Mountain with.
Oh, yeah? Who's that?
The names of our top-tier Patreon subscribers.
Of course, the Dream James Watkins, the Finnish Face via Lungfist, the Madman Marcus Hall, the Tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the Heartbreak Kid Chris Hackworth, the oh-so-suave Sean Richardson, the Notorious Nicholas Barker, the Terrifying Taylor Lashmet, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer, the Sinister Sam Kiker, the Nightmare of New Zealand Noeline Vivilli, the Loathsome Johnny Love, the Carnivorous Kevin Bogey, the Killer Stud Carl Staub, the Firestarter Heather Carter, the Conqueror Christopher Damian Damaris, the Awfully Awesome Annie, the Murderous Maggie Leach, the Serve Sexy Sam Hackworth, the Evil Elizabeth Riley, Lauren Hellfire Hernandez Lopez, the Maniacal Laura Maynard, the Vicious Karen Van Vieren, the Arch Nemesis Aaron Bird, the Sadistic Sergio Castillo, the Rapscallion Ryan Crum, the Beast Benjamin Huang, the Devilish Chris Doucette, the Psycho Sam, the Electric Emily Zhang, the Ghoulish Gert Hankum, the Renegade Corey Ramos, the Crazed Carlos, the Antagonist Andrew Park, the Monstrous Michaela Schur, the Witchy Wonder J.P. Weimer, the Freaky Ben Forsyth, the Barbaric Andrew Barry, the Mysterious Marcella, the Hellacious Cale Hoffman, and Pugblorb, the Poltergeist.
Oh, yes, folks. If you don't want to go missing, head on over to patreon.com/creepstreetpodcast. That sounded real threatening. I apologize. But if you're looking for a good time, head on over to patreon.com/creepstreetpodcast. That's where you want to be for all sorts of goodies. We upload things there, such as the sketches before they go live, bonus episodes, obviously. But citizens, we thank you so much for joining us, and we love you, and we thank you for your support. Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
And I'm Gage Hurley.
Good night, and goodbye.